Good morning, everybody, and a huge welcome to you all for today's executive briefing, looking at the increased risks associated to women and LGBTQ plus travellers, and what you as companies can do to support them and fulfil your duty of care obligations. My name is Erica. I am the Operations Manager here at Maiden Voyage. I'm here simply just to run through the housekeeping, and our founder, who you can see on your screen now, and CEO Carolyn Pearson will be delivering the key information to you today. This webinar will last about an hour and it is being recorded. Slides are copyright of Maiden Voyage. There are going to be a few polls throughout the session, so please do be responsive to these, and there will be time for questions at the end. To do this, simply write in the question box, which will be in the panel bar, and click submit. If you would like to remain anonymous, please state this in the text box. So let's move on. Having won numerous awards, Maiden Voyage has been widely featured in the international press, including the BBC, The Economist and The Guardian. Carolyn is a regular speaker on the international speaker circuit on the subject of female and LGBTQ plus business traveller safety, and indeed also represents women travellers on the GBTA Risk Committee. So without further ado, I'm delighted to hand you over to Carolyn. Over to you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Erica, and good morning. I can see we've got fantastic attendance from around the world today, which is always exciting for me. So I just want to quickly run through the agenda of what we're going to cover this morning. I'm going to just be taking a few seconds just to explain who Maiden Voyage are. We're going to be looking at whether or not the gender agenda is appropriate in 2018. We're going to be looking at whether or not diverse travel risk management sits within your organisation, and if it does, where it sits. I'm going to share with you today some case studies of organisations who have invested in the gender agenda. I'm going to also share with you some top tips on how to safeguard your diverse traveller groups, and then, as Erica mentioned, we're going to have some time for questions. So we're just going to get started with a small poll.
To release that question on your screen, which title best represents your position? So let me just release for you. It should be on your screen now. Let's just check technology is working this morning. Okay, so those results are coming in. Couple more seconds. 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to close that now and share that with you on screen. So we've got 26% travel risk management professionals, 29% travel bookers and managers, 32% fall under the other, Carolyn. So I'm going to close that off for you now.
Wonderful. If you do fall into the other category, feel free to just pop that in the chat box so we have an idea of your roles within your organisations as well. So literally just 2 seconds really just to have a quick run through who Maiden Voyage are. I launched the organisation 10 years ago. We are specialists in LGBTQ and female business traveller duty of care, and we actually set the recognised standard for female friendly hotels around the world. I'm going to give you an idea of some of the partners that we work with. So if we have a look on the screen here, we can see that we partner with a number of travel management companies and also international SOS. I'm just going to talk you through some of our solutions. Really, our raison d'etre, our reason for being, is that we make business travel safe and social for your diverse traveller groups, and we help organisations such as yourselves to safeguard your female and LGBT travellers by really providing that duty of care in a sort of sensitive environment. And I'm going to be talking about what women want from this agenda as we get deeper into the material. So firstly, we have a corporate solution. So this is where we come into organisations, we review your travel policies and processes to look at the issues based around gender and sexual orientation. We provide travel safety webinar as part of that rollout. We have a traveller wellbeing webinar series, and in fact we have one running tomorrow on beating jet lag. So if you do want to join that webinar, please get in touch with our Erica or myself, and we can get you booked on. We recommend female-friendly hotels as part of the corporate membership, but also it's a social network. Maiden Voyage started life as a social platform to connect female business travellers, and these days corporates are using that to connect their own employees. And finally, we're supported by a global team of ambassadors who can be, I guess, your friend in every city, or what we like to call ourselves a female foreign office, whereby colleagues can reach out to a woman in a destination that they're travelling to understand the specific gender needs in that country. We also provide a series of e-learning modules, so 5 20-minute modules on hotel safety, intercultural awareness, packing and pre-planning, safe meetings and leisure, and also safe ground transportation. For those organisations who prefer more high touch, we also have a classroom training solution whereby we come on site, we deliver travel safety training, which is completely tailored to your organisation's profile, risk profile, but also the destinations that you're travelling to. And for those of you who are travel risk managers on the call, what we sometimes find is that this is also a great PR exercise for the security team, who can co-deliver those courses with us, just to outline to your travellers all the things that you already do for your travellers that they may not be aware of. So Maiden Voyage is also a research organisation, and in 2016 we developed the Women in Business Travel Report, which allowed us to look at the specific issues impacting women travellers across different segments of the business travel experience. And I'm going to be sharing some of those stats with you in a moment. But really, what I want to move on to is whether or not a gender agenda is even appropriate in 2018. We're all pushing for equality in the workplace, equal rights, but actually I'd like to just get your take as to where you are at the beginning of the webinar, and Erica's going to release the next poll for us.
Okay, fantastic. So you can see the question on the screen. Do you believe organisations should be mindful of gender and sexual orientation when developing travel risk policies? So I'm just going to poll for you now. Yes, no, or unsure. The responses are coming in now. A few of you that are unsure, I'm going to give you a few more seconds. It's just saying 88% of you have voted. Okay, so I'm going to close that poll for you now, and I'm going to share that on the screen. So you can see there that 90% of you say that you believe organisations should be mindful, 3% say that they shouldn't be mindful, and 8% say that they are currently unsure, Carolyn.
Wow, 90%, that's a really high number. Now the next poll, I'm just going to look at where the differences between people who think that they should and the organisations who are actually doing anything. So Erica, could you talk us through the next one?
Yeah, sure. So you can see the question on the screen. Do you currently factor in gender and or sexual orientation? So this is whether or not you currently do it. So let's just release that poll for you. So do you currently factor in gender and or sexual orientation when looking at travel and travel risk policies? Yes or no? We can get a few more of you voting. Brilliant. Okay, 2 more seconds. I'm going to close that poll. Okay, so you can see from there that 38% say that they do, Carolyn, and 63% say that they don't.
Wow, okay, so that's actually not uncommon, and the main blocker we feel is that organisations believe that they should do something, but they just don't know how to get started. So spoiler alert, after today's session we've actually developed a infographic which we can share with you, which gives you 10 easy steps on how to get started with the gender agenda. So it sounds like I'm already preaching to the converted, but it would be remiss of me not to get the elephant in the room, because there are 3% of you who think that we shouldn't have a gender agenda, and there are 8% of you on the fence. So hopefully by the end of the webinar, we may be able to get you to go one way or the other. So the elephant in the room, as I've mentioned, is it's 2018. We're talking about female-specific or LGBT-specific travel safety advice. So why on earth would we be doing that? Why would an organisation like Maiden Voyage exist specifically to focus on one segment or two segments of the business travel community? So let's have a look at some of those reasons now. Whilst we typically live in the Western world in a fairly equal society, although the Me Too campaign would have us say otherwise, if you look more widely at the world, what we can see is that actually in some parts of the planet, women and LGBT travellers will be subject to some specific legal restrictions. So that may be, for example, until recently, women weren't allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia. It could be something more nuanced. If we look at some of the cultural restrictions, for example, inappropriate dress or the way that we behave in certain countries could put us at risk. But also, women are more prone to sexual assault, sexual harassment in general anyway. But what we found is when we cross this with culture and travel, that risk increases. And then also, looking specifically at the LGBTQ community, I'm going to be looking at some legal restrictions around homosexuality, but of course we've got the risk of homophobia as well. And then the next one might seem a little trite by comparison, looking at handbag theft, but if one imagines that somebody is travelling on business in a strange country where they don't speak the language and the handbag is stolen, then suddenly they've lost access to maybe their mobile boarding pass, their hotel details, their ability to pay for their hotel, and their comms devices. And this is a really common crime which is committed, which impacts a number of business travellers. And then finally, let's not forget the specific health implications. So that could be you're sending somebody to an area where we've got the Zika virus, but also think about simple things like access to contraception or to sanitary products around the world aren't as readily available as they are here in the UK or in the US. Okay, so if there was to be an incident impacting one of your travellers, typically an investigation will be looking at whether or not prior to that trip you provided some of the pre-trip necessities, such as pre-trip briefings based on the destination, what your travel policy covered and advised, any risk assessments that were done prior to travel, and then of course any pre-trip travel training. And we know that lots of organisations aren't doing this across the board, and specifically not doing this with a gender slant. So we're going to be looking at some things that you might want to include as we step through the material. Now, as I mentioned, we did the Women in Business Travel report, and what we found is that 24% of women had suffered a negative incident when travelling on business, and 79% of women said that they felt underprepared to deal with any incident that they may encounter when they were travelling. 70% believe that travel suppliers should try harder to address their specific needs, and I know that we've got some travel providers on the call today, so maybe you can have a think about what you can do for your product or service to make that more accessible for the female market. And then finally, for the employers on the call today, 31% of employees felt that you as an employer didn't actually look after them specifically or sufficiently when they were travelling on business. So let's just have a look at some shocking examples of things that travellers have encountered. This poor lady checked into a hotel in the northeast of England, and the welcome message on the screen was not the typical one. Here she found a message which said, "I am going to rape you." What we've also seen is an increase or a rise in sexual assault on board aircraft, and I'm delighted to say that our next piece of research is specifically looking at what women want from the aviation industry with a focus on sexual harassment on aircraft. So if you have any specific interest in that type of research, again, please get in touch with us if you'd like to contribute or indeed read the findings afterwards. So let's have a look at where travel risk management should be sitting in an organisation. We're going to just release another poll for you.
Okay, that's up on the screen now. So the question is, where does the ownership of travel risk sit within your organisation? So there's a few choices that you have there. Does it sit within travel procurement, security, health and safety, HR stroke D&I, or is it a combination of all of the above? %72% of you have voted coming in. I don't think it's going to be as clear cut, so as probably expected, Carolyn. So I'm going to close that for you now, and I'm going to share those results on the screen. So probably unsurprisingly, Carolyn, 63% say that it's a combination of the above, 12% it falls within HR or D&I, 12% health and safety, followed by 7% security and 5% travel procurement.
Great. And actually what we found is that that's one of the blockers to organisations implementing the gender agenda in travel risk, because it often gets passed around like a hot potato, and organisations sometimes struggle to identify who the one person is who should actually drive that project forward. So maybe that's something that you could be thinking of as we go through the material, and I'll share with you some case studies of how other organisations have done this and who within that organisation drove the agenda through. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples. We work with a large range of clients actually, and as you'll see on the screen, some of these are quite male-dominated industries. So we work, for example, in oil and gas, we work in banking, football, mining, high tech. So not your typical, what we would call feminine organisations. People often think that we really specialise in organisations who are sending young buyers, female buyers off on trips to the Middle and Far East. I'm going to run through some very specific examples with you so you can see how these work in practice. So let's start with our first one, which is a financial services client, a large bank. I was speaking at the Duty of Care conference in London about 2.5 years ago now, and after the talk I was approached by a number of what I would call your typical Canary Wharf head of travel security, head of security managers, typically sort of ex-military, who came to talk to me and say, we'd like to get started. We know that we're not really hitting our duty of care requirements, but we are really nervous about being patronising or being discriminatory, or how do we know if somebody's gay? How do we get that information to them? And one particular gentleman shared with me that he tried to advise one of his sort of ladies in her 30s who was traveling to Saudi Arabia that she may be getting less hassle if she was to wear a fake wedding ring, but actually he got his head bitten off, because what she said to him is, you wouldn't have said that to one of my male colleagues. So it is really around treading carefully with your female travellers. And in fact, what we found from our research is that women don't want to be specifically treated differently. They tell us that they want to be treated appropriately. And so the bank also wanted to encourage more women into senior positions. And what they found is that women weren't applying for those positions where there was travel required within the particular role. And therefore, they wanted to tackle that one as well. And so what we found is that because they were based in many different geographical locations, it wasn't really able to have us on site to do classroom training. So what they actually went for was the e-learning solution. And in fact, this particular organisation also encouraged all travellers, not just the female travellers, to take the training, because what they found is that then the male managers were also really cognizant of the specific issues which were impacting their women travellers. And for the women who were on the call today, I'm sure many of you will identify the things that we do, the things that we think about, particularly to avoid sexual harassment, sexual assault, when we're in a strange country, when we don't understand the culture. Things can be a lot more alarming. And as a result of that training, what we found is that more women were attracted to those senior roles. But more interestingly, both the women and the men who had done the training started to identify some very unsafe situations that they had unwittingly or unknowingly been in. And so I heard some of the male colleagues say, actually, as a result of the training, I've stopped putting women in that hotel, which is down that back alley, in this far corner of London, which is very, very quiet in the evening. So actually, they did also change some of the travel supplies as a result of that training. Now, the next example I'm going to share with you is a Silicon Valley tech giant. And one might imagine that they were looking for a high-tech solution. But actually, what happened is that a number of their staff had done the heat training, so the hostile environment awareness training when travelling to high-risk destinations. But there was a specific requirement to do something which tackled the gender agenda, again looking around sexual harassment, and also identifying things that might be concerning, say, the odd woman who's travelling with an all-male group. What we did for this particular client is did a full day workshop, so our typical sort of standard 8-hour full days course. And what we found is that for that particular organisation, they're so dynamic, they're so fast moving, that they couldn't actually commit to having people sat in a training room for 8 hours. And also, a lot of the staff didn't have that particular attention span. So what we did is we actually cut the time it took to deliver that training in Silicon Valley style. We didn't really cut out much of the content. We just deliver it at sort of 10,000 miles an hour. But what we've effectively done is trained between 600 and 700 employees, male, female, and LGBT, on female traveller safety and LGBT traveller safety. And we also know, we're really pleased that we've actually averted to physical assault because of some of the content that we delivered on that course. So we're specifically looking at predator psychology, conflict resolution, and a little bit of breakaway techniques and self-defense, and that actually saved 2 women. But also what we've seen more and more is, as we've created this trust environment between ourselves and the client, is that we're getting disclosure on every single course. So that could be that somebody's walking to find somebody in their hotel room, etc. And so then that organisation are able to deal with these incidents rather than not knowing about them, because we've come across, you know, occasions where women have actually thought about leaving their job because they couldn't face another business trip. So again, being able to feel that they're heard, that they're supported, that they can get the trauma support after the incident, and that the organisation can take off offending suppliers such as hotels from the programme really makes a difference. The next one I'm going to share with you is BP. BP have been with Maiden Voyage now for 3 years, and they were specifically looking for gender support for the disparate groups of female travellers. So not an awful lot of females within BP, and we're looking at, say, out in the field or you know, in the different areas, more high risk and hostile destinations. But actually, of course, for those women that were travelling to those destinations, they wanted to make sure that they felt ultra safe. And so BP have actually incorporated the corporate membership into their travel portal. So when people go on to book their travel, Maiden Voyage is there presented to them. So what they can do is connect with their colleagues travelling to those specific destinations. And what we've also seen is quite a lot of the BP staff taking advantage of the Traveller Wellbeing webinar series. So a different way of rolling that out, and also that will work really well if you integrate this with, say, your women's network within your organisation. And then finally, one for the industry, we're going to look at the way that we've integrated with a travel management company. So Grey Doze Group, a well-known travel management company here in the UK, they were looking for a way of providing a value add to their clients. They wanted, of course, a USP, so a competitive edge, and they wanted to provide a real high-touch service. And so the Grey Doze Group went through our certified TMC process, which means that we audit their performance with their clients, but also we speak to their travel bookers, we speak to the actual travellers to find out how female friendly they felt the Grey Doze Group were, anything that they wanted to be changed, any feedback. And as a result of that, all frontline staff were then trained in female traveller safety. So whenever they're dealing with a booking and it's a lone female traveller, they've got access to the female friendly hotel database. They can provide gender specific travel tips and advice for specific regions around the world. And so what we have seen is organisations, when they're doing the RFP for a new travel management company, asking the question, are you Maiden Voyage accredited, or what do you do for female travellers? And so that's raising the bar in the TMC industry as well. So that's given you a lot of background and had a look at the industry and some statistics, but I'm going to get into some practical things now that you can consider in terms of advice for yourselves or for your female travellers, but of course any females in your life who are travelling either on holiday or on business travel. So let's start with the first section, which is really that pre-planning. And what we see in the corporate environment over and over again is that people are so busy, so consumed with the presentation that they're about to deliver or the meeting or the outcome from the meeting that we don't take that time to actually prepare for our own physical safety. So let's start with having a look at a heat map provided by Control Risk. As you will see on the screen, we've got the typical red, amber, green areas. So that's, red for high risk, green for very low risk. But what we know is that, based on recent incidents, there is no one place in the world that is entirely safe and no one place that is entirely different. And when you also cross-match that with culture, with gender, and even the day of the week, then things can escalate quite significantly. So let's have a look at some of the things that travellers should be thinking about. Firstly, let's have a look at the socio-economic climate of a country that one is travelling to. That might dictate, for example, male or female, how we are received or perceived in that country, how we should be dressing, what we should be talking about when we arrive into that different region. But also looking at the different types of crime. So, for example, we've seen many reports of sexual assault in India. I know many of you will be sending female travellers over to India. We see that across the banking and the consultancy sector and certainly the education sector as well, but also other parts of the world such as Latin America. But also look at Barcelona, for example, a real hotspot for theft, muggings, drink spiking and handbag theft. Then let's have a look at the stability of the government. So anything particularly happening at any time, might things start to erupt very quickly? We saw some horrific incidents, impacting, say, journalists travelling to certain regions. Look at the Arab Spring incident, for example, with Lara Logan. And then also moving on to any specific dates when we shouldn't be travelling, so any anniversaries or protests. So that even could be, somewhere as innocuous as Northern Ireland on a specific day. And then finally, can we trust the judiciary system? So if somebody was to be subjected to a sexual assault and they were to report it to the police, would that mean that they could then be subject to a further sexual assault, or could it be that they could be arrested because they've actually suffered such a heinous crime? But also any specific religious issues or conflicts. We had a traveller, for example, who was travelling to a Muslim area. She was wearing a Christian symbol, cross and chain, which actually gave her some problems in that particular area. But also looking, of course, at the risk of different types of kidnap and also the disease, of course. I'm going to be talking about Zika specifically in a moment. And then finally, of course, making sure that we understand what the weather patterns are and the risk to all travellers. So let's have a look at some gender-specific stuff in terms of appearance and dress codes. First of all, I think we should think about advising our travellers to adhere to the local dress codes. Take some time to research which parts of the body should and shouldn't be exposed. So, for example, we may feel that travelling in jeans is probably the safest course of action, but of course, in some countries, tight jeans where you can see the female form is offensive and maybe even illegal. And of course, what we want travellers to do is to fit in rather than stand out. And then, of course, thinking about when travellers are travelling to more conservative countries, which parts of the body should they be more modest with, and also potentially leaving jewellery and watches at home. So we had a lady on one of our training courses recently from Sao Paulo. She doesn't travel to work with any jewellery whatsoever, and even wouldn't wear electronic devices such as a Fitbit, because again the chance of being mugged, robbed, physically assaulted for those goods is really high. And as we mentioned, potentially wearing a fake wedding ring in those regions where one would attract attention if one was single of a certain age and didn't have children. So we sometimes would advise maybe even to make up a fake family just to get rid of that curiosity of the locals. So in terms of packing, obviously, one of the things we recommend is somebody carrying a pashmina who can use it to cover up in more modest societies. I never travel without one. There's 101 uses of a pashmina. But also thinking about, is a hijab or a abaya required for your travellers? Do you keep a stock of them within your organisation? Or for those travellers who are travelling for the first time to, say, the Middle East, are they having to do that research every time to find out what, if they need one, if they have to buy one, and so on? Obviously, in the UK, we still have a bit of a heel culture. So again, thinking about recent terrorist incidents, just making sure that travellers can actually walk or run in the shoes that they are travelling in, so they can get away in a particular incident. But also thinking about logos, again, this is pertinent to male as well as female travellers. Any information around a university or your state or your country, again, could make you of specific interest to criminals. And even the type of luggage that one is travelling with could identify one's gender or indeed their wealth status. So let's just have a look at some limitations. If you're providing generic travel advice, then you may be missing out on some of these things. So, for example, start of a long haul trip, a lady might decide to pick up a woman's magazine. If we think about Cosmopolitan, notorious for articles around the bikini body or the best sex positions, but actually in some countries that literature could be perceived as being pornographic material. I've already alluded to dress codes, but also thinking around makeup, the way that we present ourselves with our non-verbal communication. So is that, strong eye contact, initiating a handshake, being quite forthright in business could be offensive. And even smiling in different cultures has different connotations. And I'm particularly a smiley, tactile person. I used to live in Holland, so there's a lot of kissing going on in Holland. But again, in some parts of the Middle East, if I was to do that, I could land myself into some hot water. I'm also a huggy person, so any sort of platonic friendships with the opposite sex, again, could put me in danger. And then just, as I mentioned, different parts of the body, where we sit in the cab, even reporting a sexual assault could put me at further risk. So that's the female travellers, but let's have a look at the LGBT community next. Now, what we know is that homosexuality is a criminal offence in some parts of the world. I'm just going to have a look again at another heat map. This is from the ILGA, the International Lesbian and Gay Association, talking about sexual orientation laws around the world. There's actually a booklet from these guys called State-Sponsored Homophobia. It lists every country in the world and what the punishment is for homosexuality. But if we take some time to look at this map here, we can see that the USA is in a lovely green, looks nice and calm. But of course, what I mentioned earlier was homophobia. So one country may well be showing us green, but if you look at, say, the USA, there are some specific states which are specifically quite homophobic. And in fact, one of our travellers was travelling to Texas wearing a Pride t-shirt, and she was advised to put something else on because that could put her at risk. So let's just have a look at some stats here. Homosexuality is a criminal offence in 76 nations around the world, and it actually carries a death penalty in a number of countries. Now, what we're not saying is that you can't send your members of the LGBTQ community to these different countries. If you could just click forward for me, please, Erica, we can show those particular ones. What it means is that you need to provide that advice in an anonymously consumable format for your LGBT travellers, because, of course, as an employer, you can't ask somebody if they are gay, and they may not volunteer that information. So things to think about is obviously dress codes, the way that we're presenting ourselves, but also our behaviour on social media. Whether or not we belong to the LGBTQ community in some respects is irrelevant. If we're liking things, then we could be perceived to be part of that community. We know, for example, that there's entrapment in dating apps. We know that hotel staff may well report two members of the same sex staying in the same hotel room if it appears that only one bed has been slept in or two beds have been put together. But also we could accidentally out our colleagues just by the conversations that we're having with them when they're on the road. I'm going to show you just a couple more examples before we move on to the health sector. So 2 ladies here caned in Malaysia, and 57 men being arrested in Nigeria. So this is happening in those parts of the world. Now we're just going to move on and look at some medical impacts on the female travellers. And as I've already mentioned, pregnancy is a specific risk when you're sending people abroad. Many travellers won't disclose the fact that they're pregnant in those first 3 months, and so you may well innocuously be sending someone to, say, a sales meeting, a sales incentive meeting in, you know, nice hotel in Mexico, but do consider the Zika virus. Somebody may be pregnant or trying to become pregnant, and if they're not disclosing that information, you wouldn't necessarily know. But of course, travel disruption and pregnancy are a heinous combination, as I'm told by many travellers who've been stuck on bouncy flights, delayed flights. But also things to think about is that your travellers will be at a higher risk, potentially from DVT. Some of the vaccinations won't be appropriate during that early period, or in fact in any part of the pregnancy. And then of course we've got the risk of morning sickness as well. One thing to also consider is fit to fly certificates. So we had a traveller who travelled from London to New Zealand recently. She had a fit to fly certificate, but on her way back that had actually expired, and she was in Dubai and she was actually ejected from the airport and told to go and get medical assessment before she was allowed to reboard that flight. So make sure that you check out what the requirements are for the airline that you're flying with, and of course making sure that your pregnant travellers do know about the local medical services, because the nearest hospital may not be the best hospital for antenatal support, or if in fact the baby does arrive early. Now, as I mentioned, Maiden Voyage have created a standard for female-friendly hotels. So my next section is a section which is close to my heart, and we spend a lot of time working with the hotel industry to look at the specific safety aspects. And so I'm going to talk around 2 areas really: what you can do and what your travellers can do, but also some hotel best practice. So I think it's a good idea to remember that a hotel is indeed a public place. If you're staying in a 500-bedroom hotel, you could actually be sharing a space at night with 1,000 people, and 1,000 cross-section of society doesn't mean that everybody is as well behaved as you or your traveller. So obviously the advice is to not open doors at 10 o'clock at night to strangers, as you wouldn't do at home, and have your travellers just really be aware of all the safety features in the hotel. Now, there have been many examples of the hotel rooms security being compromised, and that could be whereby somebody's let themselves in with a master key, which is not unheard of, or indeed very, very commonly, hotels will double book a hotel room. So of course, your first course of security is to book a hotel that has got 2 independent locks. And in fact, all the hotels on our database that we recommend have got those double locking doors. But actually in some parts of the world, particularly South Africa, alarmingly, hotels won't have these double locking doors. And so what we recommend is maybe taking a device such as the door jammer or a door wedge, so that your travellers can secure the hotel doors. And in fact, sadly, something like 51% of women have told us that they felt uncomfortable in a hotel, and therefore they've slept with a chair behind the door, or the luggage or a rubbish bin, just so that they would be alerted if somebody tried to get in. But one of the other risks is hotels announcing room numbers out loud. And there's nothing more annoying when you're stood at reception and a hotel receptionist announces your room number out loud to everybody who's stood behind you. And again, this is not really us being sort of prissy. We have an example of a lady who checked into a hotel in Milan. The hotel announced her name and her room number. She got to the hotel. There was a knock at the door, and the person behind the door said her name. She assumed it was the concierge with her luggage, and when she opened the door without checking, without the chain on the door, this man let himself into the room and subjected her to a serious sexual assault. So this is really something that we take extremely seriously. And sadly, as I mentioned, on many of our courses, people have said that they've woken up to find somebody in a hotel bedroom. Now, as I mentioned, our next piece of research is looking at aviation sector. And I'd like to just share with you 3 examples of onboard crime. One here is theft of belongings on board, and here sexual assault of passengers. And just to dispel the myth that it's always male on female, here we have an example of a lady who sexually assaulted or groped a fellow female passenger. So I'm going to share with you some top tips. I would always think about keeping my belongings in sight when I'm traveling on the aircraft, but also potentially putting my luggage in the overhead bin, which is opposite where I'm sitting, because you can't really see your luggage if it's above your head, but you can see it if it's in the bin opposite. And also maybe putting my luggage in the bin with the zips at the back and potentially locking that as well. But also from a health perspective and a safety perspective, I like to book an aisle seat. It means I can get up and walk around during the course of the flight, but also on a long haul flight where the lights are dimmed and we have a blanket over us, less likely to be sexually assaulted or groped or whatever whilst I'm sitting in that particular seat. What we have seen and what we're finding from our research, sadly, is that responses to sexual assault on board are not sufficiently handled by the crew. And therefore, we really need you to be assertive when reporting these sexual assaults or sexual harassment. And also what we found is that alcohol will exacerbate crimes on board an aircraft. In fact, crews strongly believe that that's one of the reasons why there is so much antisocial behaviour on board. Now, when we're getting into our destination, so thinking about landing at the other end, really obvious chance of being kidnapped here is arriving at a strange airport in a strange country, being picked up by a strange person or an unknown person. So again, 3 of our travellers have been kidnapped, 1 in Latin America, 1 in India and 1 in China, by the fact that they went with somebody who had their name on a nameplate. So making sure that your passengers or your travellers or yourself have got some means of identifying your driver. Is it a registration number? Is it a password? Is it just evidence of your booking? So maybe what you want to do is just call your driver from baggage reclaim and make sure that you can identify each other before getting into that vehicle. Just takes 5 minutes, and that could be a life-changing 5 minutes. So we strongly urge you to do that. Now, I know that we've got lots of travel managers on the call as well. Think about when you're booking travel for your travellers to be arriving in those daylight hours. Again, they're going to be better orientated. They're going to be able to see where they're travelling to. And also make sure that your travellers understand what the route is to that first destination. Is it urban, suburban? Is it 10 minutes? Is it half an hour? So that they can understand if they're being taken off the route. But also, of course, having backup plans if drivers don't arrive. We had one poor lady stood in Nigeria, in Lagos, arrived in the middle of the night. Her driver didn't arrive, and that was very alarming for her as well. And of course, just a simple thing, having the location written in the local language. We've had a couple of ladies dumped on the side of the road, including one in Russia, because the driver just couldn't understand where she wanted to go. So I always pick up a business card from my hotel, or I use the key card wallet with the address on so that I can show that to a local cab driver. And then just thinking around that meeting and leisure time. So once your travellers are out and about, some things to consider is, they may not be meeting at your offices. So making sure that they and you know who they're meeting. Be mindful of the fact that drink spiking is prevalent in some countries. So make sure that that they're also maybe dictating the meeting venue, somewhere where they know that they can trust the bartenders, because we've had a couple of examples of where actually the bar staff have spiked the drinks and to lead to some hideous assaults. So making sure that you are in a trusted environment when you're meeting people, but also just ask your travellers to be very, very mindful of the information that they're sharing. I was on the London Underground a few weeks ago, and so 2 girls with their company passes around their necks with their names. I could see who they were working for. They were sharing information which could have put them or their organisation at risk. And then also what we know, of course, from the Me Too campaign is that this is a real focus is sexual harassment right now. But make sure that your travellers understand what the policies are, and the staff understand that these also extend to business trips, because we've had a couple of examples of where employees have overstepped the mark and harassed some maybe female, lower in the organisation, so taking advantage of the hierarchy, went away on business trips, and that's been very, very uncomfortable. And sadly, in some cases, it's meant that the women have actually lost their jobs rather than the perpetrators. And then in my former life in tech, I was the only woman, quite often on male social colleagues events. And so we need to be mindful how we're going to get back to our hotels, because we are seen as equals in the workplace, and it's no one particular male colleague's job to make sure that I get home safely. I would take responsibility for that myself. And then finally, just want to look at social media. 75% of burglars have used social media to stake out a property that they would be robbing, because somebody's decided to share online that they're on a business trip, that they've checked into a first-class lounge, or that they're in the penthouse of a nice hotel. But also what we know is that will invalidate any insurance if you're sharing that information, so you don't want to be doing that. I talked earlier about kidnap. A new crime which is hitting the airwaves is virtual kidnap, whereby somebody's checked in to say that they're on a long flight, and of course then somebody could be an opportunist and say, well, actually I've just taken Erica Toes, and contact me or a family to ask for a ransom, when in fact Erica's just having a nice glass of champagne and reading a copy of Cosmopolitan on her flight. So that's really the content that I'm going to share with you today. Just some next steps for you to help you. I've shared with you a little bit around Maiden Voyage. We've looked at whether or not the gender agenda is appropriate. If you were on the fence around that, feel free to share with us any comments in the chat box about if you came off the fence, which way you went. If you felt you shouldn't have a gender agenda, then feel free to say if you've changed your mind. We've also talked about where travel risk management sits within your organisation. So again, if you'd like to have a chat with us around that, feel free to share any comments. I've shared with you some case studies of how organisations have tackled the gender agenda, and also a few top tips, which are actually extracts from our classroom course on how to safeguard your diverse travellers. So in terms of what's next, we are going to be sharing our time and our expertise with you in terms of follow-up. So what I'm gladly going to be offering are 15-minute consultations with either myself or Erica, where you can ask any question that you like around travel risk for female and LGBT travellers. So on our previous webinar, we had people talk to us about integrating, for example, the sharing economy, how they would use Airbnb, what about Uber? So anything that's specific that you're thinking of, we can look at that. And we're going to have some time for questions, but also, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm really pleased to say that we've developed an infographic now, which will allow you to get started. So from the 90% of you who said that you felt that gender agenda was specifically important within your organisation, but you weren't yet doing it, only 38% of you were doing something, then hopefully the top 10 getting started infographic should help you as well. So you've heard enough of my voice for this morning. I'm going to hand over back to Erica, who can take any questions from the audience.
Great, thank you so much, Carolyn. I think there's lots of food for thought. Right, we've got some questions coming in right now, so let's just have a look. Someone's put here, I do feel that a gender agenda is relevant for the work I do internationally. However, my HR colleagues have negative perceptions of countries that are based more on exaggerated views of countries, i.e. in Africa, as opposed to adopting a realistic approach. This is the challenge within my organisation. How can we conduct travel to countries with risk in a measured way that is not based on stereotyped view of an African country?
Okay, so actually what we're seeing now is an overlap between duty of care, travel risk and traveller well-being. And what we find is that women travellers travelling to destinations, and this is where I think the person who's made the comment is actual risk versus perceived risk. And of course, if somebody's travelling to the DRC, they're going to be really nervous about sexual assault. And in fact, they were looking at South Africa there was 44,000 rapes last year. So there is an actual risk, but also that perceived risk may be higher. And I think that's what the person is alluding to. But actually, there's going to be pre-travel related stress and anxiety if we're traveling to some of those destinations. And as I mentioned, organizations have got this duty of care to safeguard their travelers. But what we know is that actually the risk of mental health issues with business travelers is getting quite disproportionate and actually is becoming a serious issue. But that's actually going to also impact the performance of those travelers. It may be that women won't take those roles, or they won't do that travel, or they'll bury how they're feeling and they're going to travel with this heightened sense of risk and anxiety. So we'd be happy to maybe tackle that conversation with yourselves, with your HR people, to look at how we don't advise women based on project fear, but we look at how we can do that in a calm and measured way and look at the actual risks.
Fantastic. And I've got the name of the lady that's asked that, so thank you very much for asking that, and we will be in touch with you directly to explore that in more detail to help you. Someone else has put here, what is a simple but effective step when adopting a travel risk policy?
I might need to ask some questions back. It depends on the size of the organisation. So if you are a large bank, for example, you'll probably have a travel risk manager who has got procured the services of, say, somebody like International SOS or World Aware. If it's a small company who's just getting started, then obviously we need to look at, you know, what's realistic in terms of budget and also, you know, ability to roll out such a programme. And so I don't know if that person can maybe give us an indication of the size of the organisation, just so that I can answer that more fully. But again, if they're not comfortable to do that, we can also do that on a call afterwards.
Okay, fantastic. And someone else has put here, what are some areas of travel that I wouldn't be aware? Yeah, that one doesn't quite make sense. Someone's made a typo in that. How can I best approach any LGBT staff without actively outing them?
Okay, so you can't actually go, I think you're LGBT, so this is the advice that I'm going to give you. What I would recommend is that you make the information readily available. And as I mentioned, the ILGA report, Stonewall have also got some fantastic information for LGBT travellers, and put them on your company intranet or a central place where people can access them, and then make it widely known that information is available. Because as I mentioned, you can't ask anybody what their sexual orientation is, or you can ask them, but they're not legally required to tell you. Once they've got that information, they can consume that anonymously, then they're going to be more comfortable. And then, of course, if you are sending a traveller to a country where homosexuality is punishable by death, naturally they're going to have some concerns. So I would also make it available for someone to have that specific conversation if they don't want to go to that specific destination. So, for example, what we know is British Airways do not have a policy where people can opt out of a certain destination. So it's all about making sure that they've got the information. And I think their head of security there, William Sandover, would talk about you can be gay, but don't do gay in that particular country. So it's how you behave when you're in those confines of those particular countries.
Fantastic, thank you. Someone else has put here, where do you feel travel safety should sit within a company?
Oh, good question. And actually, you just caught me out because I missed a bit of crucial information with those case studies. So if we have a look at the 4 case studies that we did BP, we did the Silicon Valley tech giant, and we did the bank. And so within BP, it was a head of travel risk, head of security, who had a view on travel risk as well. So it was him who actually implemented Maiden Voyage. Within the Silicon Valley tech giant, again, somebody from the travel safety department, so they had a specific team dedicated to that. And then within the bank, it was actually security in cahoots with the learning and development department. But I absolutely agree, and going back to the first question about high risk destinations, that it's maybe one person who's going to drive the project or one person who's going to be the budget holder, but actually you have a lot of stakeholders. And in fact, what we've seen in some organizations, in a consumer electronics company, for example, is that the head of security strongly believes that they should have a gender agenda, but we have a senior female lawyer who thinks that all travellers should be treated the same, and she's actually blocking that particular project. And so you need to garner the support of all those people, but ultimately you do need one person who's empowered and has got the budget and the clout within the organisation to say this is important and we're going to do it, and we're proud that we're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, you know, I know everybody looks at budgets, Carolyn, but, you know, you can't afford to leave it until it's too late, until an incident does happen, can you really?
No, and also it's not just the reputational risk or damage to the organisation. You know, if you put yourself in the position of the lady who worked for a media giant who was actually kidnapped and withheld, you know, for a number of weeks, that's life-changing. The trauma on that person, you know, is horrendous and hideous, but also, you know, as an organisation, you know, if these people don't come back, you're going to have to replace them. Somebody's leaving quickly as a result of an incident. It's just something that you don't want to have to go for, and of course you definitely don't want to find yourself in a tribunal because of failure to meet duty of care.
Absolutely. And Chris, thank you for asking this. I was going to mention this. Yes, we will be sharing a link to the presentation. So we just have to wait for that to do its thing and upload itself. And then we will be sending a link out by the end of today, so you can share the link internally. Yeah, just in terms of next steps, as Carolyn mentioned, we will be in touch to offer you the 15-minute consultation. We're very happy to have those conversations with you. Great to have so many of you on the line today listening and taking the active, positive interest in the whole gender agenda. Hopefully, as a result of today, we've answered some questions that you might have had. And clearly there'll be many challenges as well, and we're here to help. You know, we work very collaboratively and proactively. Carolyn is definitely an expert in this field, and we will definitely be in touch to help you. Is there anything else that you would like to cover, Carolyn? And if there's any other questions, feel free to get them in.
No, I think just two things really. As I mentioned, women don't want to be treated differently. We want to be treated appropriately. So if somebody does ask that question, you know, why are we even focusing on females? What about all the different traveller groups? Just remember, you know, those specific things around legal restrictions, cultural restrictions, Zika, sexual harassment, and hopefully that will help people to get in with the agenda that 90% of you believe should be there.
Absolutely. And you know what, it's actually just reminded me of the survey that we did out to the academic sector, and one of the results, actually, it was, whilst our results showed 24%, so just under 1 in 4 women have experienced some form of negative incident. In the academic sector, it was 28%, so slightly higher. But what's quite concerning, from memory, I believe it was 48% of those people that had experienced an incident didn't mention it to anybody, so it didn't go recorded anywhere. So incidences are happening, but potentially you are not hearing about it because there may not be that mechanism to do so, or they don't feel confident in doing so. What do you think about that, Carolyn?
Well, hopefully by constantly pushing the envelope at Maiden Voyage and driving that agenda, we will be getting more people talking about it, because as I mentioned earlier, on our classroom courses, we are definitely getting disclosure.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, well, we don't have any further questions, so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all for investing this hour of your time. As I said, hopefully you've picked some good top tips up that you can take forward and put into practice, and we will be in touch with you this week to arrange for our 15-minute consultation with you. So thank you very much, and we will be in touch, and as I mentioned, we'll be sending you a link to the recording as well. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you, everybody.